what we're going to do for the rest of the morning is really look at the examples that you've taken and think about how that matches over and translates into the family of believers. Are there things in there? And one of the exercises we will do is to look at the things that we tend to involve, how we act in church and with other people. Are there things that we could be doing better, not harder, but better, to actually demonstrate the love? So people will say, you look at you and give glory to God, which is what I think it's Paul says. Okay, so just looking back to some scripture again, this is the one we started off this morning, where it says, love for each other, love one another deeply from the heart. The King James Version is really interesting. It says fervently, and it says love from the heart fervently. Peter actually, in the same letter, and this was an early letter, repeats it again in chapter 4. If you look at chapter 4, of course, Peter didn't put them into chapters, but in that part of the letter, he repeats it. He says it again. He says, above all, okay, love each other. And that means everybody in that family of believers love each other. You don't just love the ones you like. And in fact, that's the good thing about this. You don't have to like people. You just have to love them. Okay. Yeah. And it says love covers over a multitude of sins. In other words, it helps people to deal with them in a positive, supportive way. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace. And you only have to read the letters of Paul, and if you've been listening to Peter's online daily reflections, John, dealing with John, here are two people that knew Jesus intimately. They knew his heart, they'd heard most of all. They might have messed up a few times, Peter certainly did. But he knew and he heard and he knew what the message was. He was transformed. And this was obviously a key message. Love each other. How many churches over the years have broken up or split because one faction refuses to love the other faction? I'm not looking at Mousy Baptist because I've got no idea about the hit. Well, I have a little bit, but that's not what I'm talking about. I've seen it at Salvation Army level call, where people have wanted one thing, they don't like what's happening, and then they all move to another place. And it just causes pain and suffering, and it's such a shame that Christians should be doing that, and people are looking on thinking, well, actually, they're no different from us, are they? They're no better. They're just as selfish. I think that's what the thing about every Christian can be Christ-like. I love that line. I think it's such a positive line because we assume we're there. And tomorrow when we look at the second letter of Peter, he says, okay, you got to the first bit, now you've got to think about, I said in my first letter, be holy because I am holy. That's what God says to them, be holy because I am holy. I'm going to show you perhaps how you can become holier. Okay, not holier than thou, but holier. Right. And I go back to this one again, the Thessalonians chapter verse from Paul. You know, may your love increase and overflow for each other, but wait a minute, everyone else. So one of the things, we haven't got that much time, but one of the things I'd like you to, when we do the exercise, is to think in terms of how that translates into church life. Are there people that actually don't feel loved, don't feel they belong? But what does that translate into the family, the children of God who are yet to be drawn into his family? So we hopefully think about that as well. Okay, so Eugene Peterson, I just love his message because a lot of people look down on it because it's not really a translation. It's a sort of a paraphrase. But I just love it because it just makes me think differently about what I've read before. And when I go back to the reading the NIV, which I tend to use, then it just gives me another colour to that. And he says it in such a refreshing way. But in his book, The Jesus Way, and if you've not read it, it's an excellent book, he talks about the Jesus Way is not about organisations. It is about the church, but it's not about organisations. It's about relationships. And the whole thing that we're here for is to build relationships. And he says that in this, the church is the primary place for dealing with the particulars and the people we live with. So it's how we work with those things. And it's insistently local and pastoral. That's the key focus. It is local and pastoral. That's one of the issues about the Salvation Army where I'm at fault, because I commute effectively. But I do feel that God's placed me there and needs me to be, not needs me to be there, but wants me to be there. I'm sure it would cope quite nicely without me. But I just feel that's where God wants me to be. But actually, you have such a beautiful thing, whereas many of you live so close to the church, but you're also part of the community that the church is in. Yeah. And how beautiful is that? Yeah. Insistently local and personal. But this is the thing, it's the place for a community for listening to and obeying Christ's command, for inviting people to consider and respond to Jesus' invitation, follow me, in a place of community and worshipping God. And we know the church is not the building, we know that. Actually, the church is not the program either. It is the relationships that form using the program as a platform and the church perhaps as a location. But even then the location is much wider. The community is at your whole choice to use. Okay, so one of the things I just want to share with you, and I hope you don't mind, are some of the things that over the years I just felt I wanted to share with you. First of all, my impressions of coming to Nailsea, I was amazed that what I saw and thought I could see was the cooperation between Christians within Nailsea. There seemed to be a real Christian presence in Nailsea. That was my perception. And it hasn't changed. But how much it works together is another thing altogether, and it's a shame. Because it's interestingly, because we are chaplains, Marion and I are chaplains, because we responded to a call, which I think Margaret Blakey was involved with. Is that right? And that was supposed to have gone out to everybody to say it was there. And yet conversations I've had with people say, oh, I didn't even know there was a chaplaincy. Didn't even know there was a town chaplaincy. It's very young. And obviously you don't want hundreds and thousands of people, but obviously the more you've got, the more you can actually bring variety, and you can, people that respond to you in different ways, the greater variety of people. I just feel it's a thing that called us to do, because we wanted to feed in that Christian presence in the community in the everyday. The other thing I really loved is the way I was embraced by you. I was embraced by you from the point of view on one of these, what I call fuzzy-edged sort of programs, okay? So a fire pit evening, okay? It's not formal. There's no sort of membership. It does help if you get on the WhatsApp group, and if you want to be on the WhatsApp group, then you better see those who are sort of tend to drive it. Rob tends to drive it, I think, and Phil Page. But there are people from all different places. And I couldn't believe it that the conversations we had were about faith. Not all the time, it was also about whiskey, but that was only when Crawford was going on about it. It was about lots of other things. But I actually shared faith. Now, I'm not a big one for single gender meetings. I've always tried to, in the past, not sort of stood away from them. not away from them, but not encourage them, because it can tend to become siloed. But I must admit, I just felt embraced in this fire pit chat, chance to go to different things, and it just felt so important. We did a course as well, which you put on, which again helped me, a Christian mind you, getting embraced. Now, it's lovely because there are people who invite their friends every so often, and we go to different places. But I just thought it's one of those communities, because very often there's a difference between open programs that we put on and closed programs. The closed programs are the ones where you have to be a member because you qualify in a certain way. Let me give you an example. Sometimes in the past it's been very like that with the Salvation Army, the band. Okay, well, you could be a member, you've got to wear a uniform, you've got to play an instrument. But actually, and when I first moved to Bristol, it was, you actually have to be male. But that's changed, and over the years, we now have what we have in open. As long as you can make a reasonable noise, well, and in fact, it doesn't even matter that much, but... But to be honest, that people want to just be part of that. They don't have to be a signed-up soldier of the Salvation Army. They don't have to wear full uniform. So it's opened up now. And actually, there are 2 or 3 people who I won't go into the details, but you're a soldier. You sign when your pledge that you will abstain from intoxication, which is why I chose these passages, because it says, "Stay alert and fully sober." Okay, so no, it's not why I chose them, but I thought they were quite salvationist passages. It used to, and that. So if you're a soldier, you sign that, and in the past you couldn't become part of the band unless you were a soldier, because of all very good reasons. Because you were representing Christ when you're on duty, and the band would go out and play festivals, or it would play for worship, but it was also do concerts and whatever. So if you didn't take on that pledge and didn't become a soldier, you could become what we lovingly call, and it's a horrible name, adherents. Okay? I suggested we ought to just call people post-its, because it's probably, but they didn't accept that one. But adherents are members of our church, but they haven't actually signed what we call the Articles of War, or made that commitment. Not to drink, and really, it's so. There's a good reason why there's a temperance or a non-alcoholic, a non-drinking organisation. Because when William Booth started it, one of the key things was the people in the gutters just wasting their money on gin and booze, and neglecting their families, and they needed to hear the gospel. And I've got a couple of those quotes I was trying to tell you, which he said, and I put them to one side so I could repeat them for you. He said, "What's the use of preaching the gospel to men whose whole attention is concentrated upon a mad, desperate struggle to keep themselves alive? You cannot warm the hearts of people with God's love if they have an empty stomach and cold feet. But," he said, "if I thought I could win one more soul to the Lord by walking on my head and playing the tambourine with my toes, I'd learn how." Now there's attitude for you, eh? Now there's a lovely mission for somebody, ministry, okay? Why not? So what I was saying, but anyway, that has changed now. We've made it open, and when people are coming along, and they're getting influenced far more by the gospel than perhaps just hearing the band play. It's lovely hearing the band play when it plays well. It is, it's beautiful sound. But there's another problem. Sometimes it can become a performance. And sometimes it becomes entertainment. And sometimes we start shaping our churches and our core to be sort of consumer oriented. What do people like? We'll give it to them so they come in. Now, actually, Booth said that's not a bad thing to do, provided you give them the gospel, and that's a focus. But when the focus becomes the activity rather than the relationship, that's when the kingdom doesn't get spread. The kingdom doesn't grow. It's interesting that some of our long-term programs, we did a really radical change at our 125th. That's probably about 15, 20 years ago now. But it was a radical change. We got rid of one of our meetings and replaced it with a mission-based children's ministry. And that children's ministry, most of you would have heard me talk about. It was Kids Alive. And that Kids Alive was really a cross between Saturday morning telly, pantomime and Sunday school, and it was brilliant. But it was aimed at the community, and they didn't do it until they did a year of talking to the community about what would actually be helpful to them, what they actually felt would help them. And the time we chose, the Lord was good because it was a time we were able to meet, which was 4 o'clock on a Sunday. And the reason is because a lot of the kids would come back from their other parent at that time. And it would be something for them to do to transition it. But we shot up to about 125, more than that, 200 on the books. And one of my friends, John Watts, the Corps Sergeant Major before me, the Treasurer, we'd go out on the walking bus, with the rope, and so the kids would come in. And he said, in all the years, he's been doing open airs in that area, and people have always accepted us. People have always loved it. But in all the years, he's never had somebody say, "Hi, John." And this is what used to happen because we were doing this. We were out in the community. The kids would go, "Oh, hello, John." Yeah. Relationship building, it's relationships. Why is it pastoral care so important? Because that's about building and helping and supporting and healing relationship. So some of our long-term programs we had to look at, because actually we still did them, but the over 60s was quite interesting really, because they were all over 85. And anybody under 80 wouldn't go anyway, because it was not their scene. Now, how often have we put a program on and we, right, I'm leading this program. I'm not looking at you, I know nothing from that perspective, but we've done it, we're putting it on, and oh yeah, well, it's lovely ministry we do. And how's it going? Well, we've got 2 people that come along, and one's deaf, and the other, no, that's being very, very cruel, that's not. But sometimes we don't look at our program enough to say, does this meet the need as opposed to what we want to deliver? Does this really help those who would otherwise not be interested in that at all, find a way in to hear the gospel, to learn about Jesus, to respond to the call of follow me? So looking at that, we did that as well. And we went from a way of behave, believe, belong. Okay? You can come in as long as you behave yourself and you act like we do. Okay? Now, you've got to be faith. Get on your knees, you've got to have a faith. Now you can belong. So long it was like that. And I'm sure that it becomes, we want you to feel that you belong. Okay, we want you to come along. We just want you to be part of this family. And then we hope that because of that, you will believe. You will take Jesus as your own Saviour. And then that will radically change your behaviour. And we will help you change that behaviour. How often we just expect people to click into place. Now, I've talked about closed groups. It's interesting, closed groups can start out as open groups. We put this on and everybody be welcome. And then we suddenly find, we quite like being with each other. And we don't block anybody out, but we do put little fences around us. But if they come knocking on, yeah, of course you can come in. Yeah, there's plenty of room. Then actually that little fence gets higher and higher, and because we really just like being with each other. And then the door goes on. But if somebody knocks on that door and says, actually, I wouldn't mind coming to say, okay, come in. Yes. Now listen, these are the rules. And then somehow that gets locked. And actually, there's this huddle that happens, and I've seen it around the territory. There's this huddle that happens that started off with a genuinely desire to build relationships that would deepen people's relationship with God into a little huddle, a holy huddle. And that's such a shame. It's great for those people that are in it, but for those who are missing out on it, it just becomes an isolationist thing. I've seen it. It's such a shame when it happens. And then it becomes a clique. Now that can happen, as I say, in the most innocent of ways because of the busyness. People act like a clique sometimes, even though they don't mean to. Sometimes I can arrive at the Salvation Army and the band's so busy getting their instruments out, the songs are so making sure they got the right music, that actually the people that wander in don't get spoken to. And I've always felt that as my job, but I want other people to share it. Okay? Now, that's changed so dramatically, but there's still essences of it there because of the busyness. And it's not that they want to ignore the people that come in. We've got a welcome group, that's fine, we've got a welcome team. But that's just two people smiling and saying hello. They might say, okay, let me make sure you got the seat, make sure, and might even say, okay, what's your name? But sometimes they forget. And people are rushing around. I've got to get this right before we start. Oh, I've got to do this. I've got to go and make sure, the electricians are coming down. Great, dedicate people for that, but make sure that people aren't just seen in, one person talks to them, that they have that, building that network. I can't remember where I read this, don't remember at all, but I read somewhere, and I think it's true, that there's all very good reasons why people join, but there's very often reasons why they don't stay. If you just think, why did you come to worship at Nailsea Baptist? What was it that drew you there? And what is it that keeps you there? People need more than just one network connection. The important thing is, especially with new people, it's all very well someone taken under their wing, but it's about building the networks and relationships with other people. So actually they've got people that they can respond to and relate to. And so if you're not there, and they turn up and they think, oh no, got no one to talk to. Oh, I'll just sit quietly at the back. And everybody says, no, it's all right. Joyce looks like, I shouldn't use that word. I didn't mean that, Joyce, wherever you are. Just came to my head, that name, not you. Susanna looks after them. Don't talk to them. That's Susanna's couple. Exaggerated. Okay. But I think the important thing, which I love, you probably know about our candle project. We recognise we need to face outward over the years. The reason we started the Punks Lunch, the Sunday lunch, 25, 30 odd years ago, and you sent a team faithfully every month that looked after everything under my absolute supervision and Marilyn's wisdom. But actually we just let Sandra get on with it.
It's the best policy.
It is. But that's tough on Sandra if she's not feeling up to it. And then thinks, well, I've got to do it. I've got to do it because nobody else is going to do it. No. But we did that for how many years? 20, 25 years? In fact, have you all seen the little notice that recognises your service?
Yeah,
in the kitchen. Yeah, in the little cupboard, so you only see it by accident.
So I moved it. I'm sorry I moved it. I'm sorry.
No, I assumed you put it there, especially so that Marilyn and I would see it when we did the cafe. No, I'll tell you what, that was a wonderful service, but it was for a season. There was for a season. The homelessness was terrible. There was nobody doing anything in St Paul's area. And it was only because a couple of punks shouted out to our officer at the time, oh, you never do anything for us. And he's right. They were right. So we started that. Now, it changed. It changed. And it then became almost a conveyor belt because the relationship aspect of it just lost because we were so busy dealing with the conveyor belt. And then it became a point of almost taken for granted. It's very interesting. When William Booth opened his soup kitchen, he charged people a penny. 2 reasons. One, he wanted to make sure people were really needing it and weren't going to take it for granted. But also he wanted to give them some dignity. Now, we felt generous that we said, no, we can provide all of this without charging you. And that was great because our hearts were going out to a lot of these people in the early days where it was alcohol problems and then it became drug problems. And we could see people struggling. But then when people were actually standing, they say, oh, I don't like that. Oh, I don't like that. They never did that, did they, Pippa? And you suddenly think, wait a minute, are they hungry? Are we doing the right thing? He said, well, that's no good. I'm going to call my taxi and take me over to the other place that does it. It sounds peculiar, but phones became a necessity even for the homeless. Changes of values. But everybody else got into the Homeless Act, and then we really refocused, as I say, about 15, 20 years ago, and said, what's really needed? And we did some research, not massive research, but we had an officer in Mountford who was really keen on it. And it was families. There were lots of families struggling. They were really struggling with the issues. There were lots of immigrant families coming in that didn't know where to go, where to turn, that thought, well, actually, we're not Christians, so they won't want us at the Salvation Army. We getting their community to actually run something to support them in domestic issues. The Salvation Army started what they called the Home League. And it was to train women to be able to manage a good home. That's what it was about, the Home League. And then it became more of a worship thing, and it transmogrified into sort of a women's service that then became an old person service because the role of women changed. And a lot of those women weren't just making homes, they were doing that while they were also doing a job. Yeah. So when I was young, my mum used to take me to a home league which was done in an outpost in Whitefoot Lane. Now, if you're really old, you may even remember Shining Whitefoot Lane was on an advert. But anyway, Whitefoot Lane community. And she went there, didn't have to, but I went with her, I was only little. A couple that she held there was people called, I won't tell you the names, not that it makes much difference, but they have kept in touch. They kept in touch with my parents, even when they'd moved away to Wales in 1973. And their children even came to the funeral when my dad died. Building relationships. And they were linked to the army in another part of the country, but on the periphery, but nevertheless had that healthy respect for the army and its work because of that ministry. Okay, sorry, I'm going on a bit here. I do apologise, but then it's my, I've got the microphone, so okay. Any more I can give you. Understanding the community that you live in is so important if you're going to reach it. Now, you should understand, because it's not that diverse at the moment. It will change. But the struggles and the pressures that people are coming under now are immense. Peter asked the question, didn't he? What should we be doing about people who can't afford their energy increases? Now, Liz Truss has promised to keep it down to 2,500 from whatever. People are going to struggle. How do we respond as a church, as Christians, to that? I hope you've all given him lots of ideas and offered to give him lots of time. We started the family centre. We've talked about that. More open worship. Lockdown. We were okay on the business side, the business side and the pastoral side, as long as the officer did most of it and people would do it under their belt. But we realised in lockdown, one of the lovely things is we had a phone call from was it Dorothy who phoned us? Who was it? Doreen phoned us. And it was so lovely to have a phone call saying, how's things going? It's tough, you're keeping on all right? And we just thought, well, that is beautiful to be able to do that and to sustain that at a time when you couldn't just walk around and talk to people, that you didn't see them on a Sunday. And we recognised that there might be people that would lose touch. And so we started pastoral care. Our leadership team took all the people that were vulnerable and some of those who weren't so vulnerable and said, okay, we'll make sure we ring them at least once a month or twice a month. And then we, rather than have your own little group, we then swapped round so that they were hearing a different voice. And it's been really helpful to, I wouldn't say everybody, but certainly a good number of people have said they felt belong, they felt in touch. Now, we've not been so good at keeping it going because the need doesn't seem to have been there, but there are still people that haven't returned. There are still people that used to come faithfully, struggle to come faithfully, and that lockdown period actually scuppered them completely. And when it came to trying to reignite, then they just couldn't do it. But how many people knew about it? That's the point. And how many people bothered to actually say, okay, you used to be part of us, we want to make sure you are. I know Crawford goes around with his DVDs and all the other things, how important that is when people leave, not to just let them drift out the back door. So it's actually, you know, if you see somebody's not there, it's not that you're trying to sort of police them. You say, is everything okay? Missed you on Sunday. It's very simple. You don't, and the wonderful thing is you don't even have to worry about what you say because you just ask the question and you listen to the answers. And you do. You listen to the answers. And that's the wonderful thing about relationship building opportunities. I'm sure you've all been through this, is that very often conversations where people ask the question and whilst the other person's replying, they're thinking about what the question next might be. Okay? You're actually listening to reply rather than listening to understand. I think somebody wrote that on the WhatsApp recently that was mentioned. It's something that we've been teaching just in business. Listen to understand. Don't listen to reply, just to reply. Pastoral care is very straightforward, and some people might say, oh no, I'd die if I had to do that. Well, actually, Jesus did say that got to take up your cross and follow me. When you saw people in early Palestine carrying crosses, you knew there was only one thing that was going to happen. They were going to their own death. So they have to die to some of those things. But it's straightforward. Anyway, I'm starting to preach now. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Okay, so just a little bit about the importance of relationships, or importance of relationship support, which brings us back to our family of believers this time. I hope some of you bought the programme. Yeah. If not, I've put some up here. I did. Good. Now, as I've said, the church is not the building, it's not the programme, it's the people, but it's the relationships between the people which is important. And even more important is their relationship with God. Okay, so it's how you actually bring those together. So, we're not going to worry about the middle ones for the young people and children. So I just put in a few more there. There's some online stuff. Ministry teams can also embrace people and involve people so that you're not, you know, I was chatting to Neil at breakfast and just asked him about, he was talking about leading worship, and he said it just didn't seem to be that enough, so he felt he had to stand up and do it, even though it wasn't natural for him. And we heard earlier in one of the readings, it just says, you know, use your gift to serve others. So my question to you is, are you actually using the gifts that God's given you? And have you actually taken the bother to find out what that might be?